We're going to explore the Assyrian Empire, a civilization known for its military strength, incredible art, and captivating stories. We'll travel back thousands of years to uncover their secrets and understand their legacy, what it means for us even today.
It's amazing how the Assyrians thought of themselves. They saw themselves as inheritors of this really ancient history. They were inspired by legends like Gilgamesh, and Sargon the Great. These figures were already ancient history to the Assyrians. It's almost like they felt they were standing on the shoulders of giants.
So they were aware of this long history that came before them, especially the importance of Mesopotamia.
Yeah.
This region, well, we've talked about it before, but it really was a cradle of civilization, like the birthplace for some of the world's very first societies.
Assyrians came from this really rich mix of civilizations, the ones that rose and fell along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, that region we call Mesopotamia. Their story really shows the lasting power of that ancient legacy.
So let's start our exploration with the city of Ashur, the heart of the Assyrian Empire. It all began in what is now modern-day Iraq, right there on the Tigris River. What can you tell us about this location, its strategic importance?
Well, Ashur wasn't just a city. It was a vital hub, a hub for trade and commerce. Because it was on the Tigris River, it became a crossroads for goods and ideas flowing through the region. Archaeologists, they've actually found hidden stashes of gold and lapis lazuli jewelry. So that gives us evidence of the wealth that passed through Ashur.
Wow. It's amazing to imagine those ancient trade routes, all the activity, that must happen in Ashur. And this is where we see something really interesting about Mesopotamian religion. Each city had its own, divine protector, and the city of Ashur shared its name with its patron god.
That's right. The god Ashur, he was totally linked to the city's fate, its fortune. As Ashur prospered, so did the god's importance. He even challenged the traditional hierarchy of the Mesopotamian gods. Just imagine, a city so successful its god rose to challenge Enlil, the king of the gods.
It really shows, the importance of religion, that close relationship between the divine and the earthly in ancient Mesopotamia. But the story of the Assyrians, it changes during the Bronze Age collapse. It was a time of massive upheaval and destruction that completely reshaped the ancient world.
Many civilizations crumbled during this really chaotic period. But the Assyrians, they took a different approach. They withdrew strategically, consolidated their power, and bided their time. And because they were resilient, they didn't just survive, they were able to lay the foundation for their own empire.
It's incredible how they used a time of crisis to grow stronger. It shows how adaptable they were and their strategic thinking. And that brings us to Tiglath-Pileser I, a ruler that is connected with Assyrian expansion and power.
Tiglath-Pileser was remarkable. Not only did he get back territories lost during the Bronze Age collapse, but he expanded the Assyrian Empire. It reached as far as the Mediterranean Sea, a huge change for Assyrian history. They went from a regional power to a force on the international stage.
That is a huge accomplishment for a kingdom that started in a landlocked area. I mean, to do that, they must have had an incredible military. What made the Assyrian army so effective?
The Assyrians, they changed how warfare worked. They transformed their army into a well-oiled machine. I mean, they were masters of engineering, siege warfare, even psychological warfare. Their strategies and tactics would later be used by empires like the Romans, which shows the lasting influence of Assyrian military innovations.
They were pioneers in many ways, especially in their use of specialized units, like the cavalry and chariots, and they had a dedicated engineering corps.
Absolutely.
This structure let them fight wars on a scale never seen before.
And their tactics, they were definitely effective, but they also show a darker side of their rule. The Assyrians used mass deportations, uprooting entire populations. They would scatter people throughout the empire. It was brutal, designed to crush their enemy's spirit and prevent uprisings.
It's a reminder of how much conflict costs in terms of human life, even in ancient times. These tactics might have worked for a while, but they created a lot of resentment, instability that would eventually contribute to their downfall. It really makes you think about the ethics of power, right? And the long-term consequences of using force to maintain control.
It does. And while we learn about the Assyrians for their military innovations and political strategies, we can't forget the effects of their actions on those they conquered. It reminds us that history isn't just about celebrating the good things, it's also about understanding the complexities and consequences of human choices.
So we have this image of the Assyrians as this mighty military force. But what about daily life? I mean, did everyone live under constant threat of war?
Not Really, we actually have a pretty good understanding of daily life in Assyrian cities. They left behind so many clay tablets. Nineveh, their capital, was a really busy center for trade and culture. Think bustling marketplaces, temples, even schools. There are letters and documents that give us a peek into the personal lives and worries of everyday people.
Those details are fascinating. It makes the Assyrians seem more human. It reminds us that even in these grand empires, there were regular people living their lives, raising families, dealing with everyday problems. Do you have any specific examples that come to mind?
Well, there's one letter from a schoolboy. He's complaining about his clothes. It just shows you that kids, even thousands of years ago, were still kids. They wanted to fit in, have the latest fashions. Another letter tells about a really scared citizen. There was a lion trapped in a loft. It reminds us of the dangers they faced even in their own cities.
Those little stories really bring the Assyrian world to life. We get to see their hopes, their fears, their everyday struggles. But we can't talk about the Assyrian Empire without talking about the Sargonid dynasty. Their story is full of ambition, intrigue, and ultimately, it sets the stage for the empire's own collapse.
It's true. The Sargonid kings, Sargon II, Sennacherib, Esarhaddon, and Ashurbanipal, they brought Assyria to its highest point. But their reigns were also marked by internal struggles, decisions that would ultimately weaken the very foundation of their empire.
Wow, it sounds like something out of a play, full of twists and turns.
Yeah, it does, and it all starts with Sargon II. He named himself after the legendary Akkadian king. He really set the stage for a dynasty known for its grandeur and instability.
His choice of name, it suggests he wanted to connect with a glorious past, to be seen as the heir to a legacy of power and conquest. But let's talk about his son, Sennacherib, the king who made the decision to destroy Babylon, a city full of history and religious significance. That seems incredibly bold and maybe reckless, don't you think?
It's a decision that has puzzled historians for centuries. Babylon was more than just a city. It was a symbol of Mesopotamian culture and religion. By destroying it, Sennacherib was making a statement. But it really backfired. It created so much resentment, and that would have long-lasting consequences.
It's a classic example of might makes right, but it also shows a lack of understanding. He didn't seem to get the cultural and religious importance. Destroying a city doesn't erase what it means to people, or the memories associated with it. It often turns people into martyrs and fuels a desire for revenge.
You're absolutely right. What Sennacherib did alienated the Babylonians. They had a long history of independence and pride, and it made other people within the empire doubt Assyrian rule. Was it legitimate? Was it stable?
It reminds us that even the most powerful empires can be vulnerable to things like cultural identity and the resentment that people feel when they're oppressed or pushed aside. But that wasn't the only problem Sennacherib had. He had some serious family drama to deal with, too.
Oh, yeah. The story of Sennacherib and his sons, that's a whole other story. He chose his oldest surviving son, Esarhaddon, as his heir. That made his other sons furious.
Like a soap opera.
Right, they plotted against Esarhaddon and eventually forced him into exile.
It really shows us that even in ancient times, family power struggles could change the course of history. So how did Esarhaddon become king if he was exiled?
Well, in a totally unexpected turn of events, Sennacherib was assassinated by two of his own sons, maybe because they were angry about the succession. Esarhaddon saw his chance, rallied support, and marched on Nineveh. He took back his rightful throne.
He must have been pretty resilient and politically savvy to overcome that and take power. But I bet those experiences changed him. How did that difficult journey to becoming king affect how he ruled?
Oh, the trauma of his father's assassination and his brother's betrayal had a big impact on Esarhaddon. He became known for being paranoid. He would constantly seek reassurance from oracles and priests. He even did this bizarre ritual, the substitute king ritual.
The substitute king. Tell me more about that.
Okay, so it was a ceremony meant to protect the king from evil spirits and any threats. Esarhaddon would go into hiding. A commoner would pretend to be king for 100 days. Then, at the end of that time, the substitute was executed. The idea was that they would take any bad energy or danger with them.
Wow. That's a disturbing but fascinating look into the mind of a ruler who's dealing with so much anxiety and the pressure of leadership. It shows how unstable leadership can be, even in a powerful empire like Assyria. But even with his fears, Esarhaddon did something incredible. He rebuilt Babylon.
Yes. It's possible he wanted to atone for his father's actions, to make his own rule seem more legitimate. He put a lot of effort into restoring Babylon to its former glory. It was a sign of reconciliation, trying to heal the wounds caused by Sennacherib, and maybe even trying to appease the spirits of a city that refused to be forgotten.
It was a strategic move, too. He was recognizing the importance of Babylon, that he needed to keep the people there happy and prevent rebellion. But, as we'll see, even the best plans can fall apart when family is involved and power dynamics get complicated. Now let's talk about Esarhaddon's sons, Ashurbanipal and Shamash-shumukin. To avoid conflict, Esarhaddon decided to divide the empire. Ashurbanipal became king of Assyria, and Shamash-shumukin became king of Babylon. Seems like a good solution, right? But history shows us that dividing things can lead to more tension and rivalry.
Oh, definitely. Esarhaddon's decision, while meant to be good, was a big mistake. It planted the seeds of conflict between his sons. It set the stage for a fight that would have devastating consequences for the Assyrian Empire.
So let's dive into the story of these two brothers, their ambitions, and the things that led to the final chapter of the Assyrian Empire. But first, let's think for a minute about Esarhaddon. He was a man shaped by trauma, haunted by anxieties. But he also had a desire to rebuild and reconcile. His story shows us that even the most powerful rulers are human, dealing with their own struggles and the burdens of leadership.
Absolutely. Yeah, Esarhaddon's reign, it really makes you think, it can be good and bad. It can lead to amazing things, rebuilding and creating, but it can also make people paranoid and afraid. And as we get into the story of his sons, Ashurbanipal and Shamash-shumukin, we see those same ideas, but on an even bigger scale.
Let's talk about Ashurbanipal. He's known not just for his military victories, but also his love of knowledge and learning. He was called the Scholar King, right? A ruler who could read and write. Pretty rare back then.
Ashurbanipal was one of a kind in Assyrian history. He supported the arts and sciences. He collected a huge library at Nineveh, thousands of clay tablets. This library, it's a treasure trove. It has Mesopotamian literature, history, religion, even scientific texts. It's like a window into their intellectual world.
It's amazing to think about all those tablets, the work it took to put together such a huge collection. It says a lot about how much he valued learning
Yeah.
and preserving the knowledge of the past. But he wasn't just a scholar. He was a fierce warrior too, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. Ashurbanipal led a lot of military campaigns. He fought against the Elamites, Egyptians, even his own brother Shamash-shumukin. Even though he loved learning, he was also a skilled military strategist and a pretty ruthless leader. He knew how to use force to stay in power.
Right. It reminds us that ancient Mesopotamia was a turbulent place. Power was often fought for on the battlefield. So what caused the conflict between Ashurbanipal and his brother, Shamash-shumukin?
Well, Shamash-shumukin was ruling in Babylon. It's possible that he felt like he was in his brother's shadow, that Ashurbanipal had more power and influence. He probably also resented Assyria interfering in Babylonian matters. He might have seen it as a threat to his own authority.
It's like a classic story of sibling rivalry. But it's made worse by the issues of power and empire. Dividing the empire like Esarhaddon did, it was supposed to prevent conflict. But it really just created more tension and resentment.
Exactly. And that tension finally boiled over into war. Shamash-shumukin wanted independence, maybe even control of the entire empire. So he teamed up with the Elamites and other enemies of Assyria. He challenged Ashurbanipal's rule directly.
That's a pretty dramatic turn of events. A brother turning against brother in a fight for control. How did this war go?
It was a brutal war that lasted for years. Ashurbanipal was furious with his brother. He unleashed the full force of the Assyrian army on Babylon. The city, which was once a symbol of Mesopotamian culture in Esarhaddon's attempts to make peace, was under siege again. Eventually, it was captured.
It's like a repeat of what Sennacherib did, destroying Babylon. It shows how violence can repeat itself. And the constant tension between Assyria and Babylon. What happened to Shamash-shumukin?
Well, the accounts are different, but some historical records say that he died during the siege. Maybe he committed suicide rather than being captured and humiliated by his brother.
That's a sad ending to a story of ambition, betrayal, and family conflict. It shows us that even in ancient times, relationships and family problems could have a huge impact on history. But Ashurbanipal's victory didn't solve all his problems. He still had the Elamites to deal with. They had sided with his brother.
You're right. The war with Elam was especially brutal. Ashurbanipal wanted revenge. He wanted to crush anyone who opposed him. He led his armies deep into Elamite territory, destroying cities, temples, and scattering their people.
That's what they call a scorched earth policy, right? Meant to completely destroy the enemy and prevent any future challenges. But even if those tactics worked in the short term, they usually cause long-term resentment and instability.
Absolutely. Ashurbanipal's campaigns were successful in expanding the empire and solidifying his power. But they also laid the groundwork for future conflicts. All that destruction created a power vacuum. And it wasn't long before a new enemy appeared: the Medes.
The Medes, weren't they an Iranian people?
Hmm.
I think I remember them getting stronger and more influential around this time. They must have seen weakness in the Assyrian Empire, right?
Yeah.
And took advantage of it.
Exactly. The Medes made alliances with groups that were unhappy with Assyria, like the Babylonians. They wanted to get rid of Assyrian control. Together, they launched attacks that weakened the Assyrian Empire.
It's fascinating how the Assyrians, by their own actions, caused their own downfall. Their military power, their brutality, their need to expand, it all backfired. They created enemies who were just waiting for the chance to get revenge.
It's a classic story of arrogance and what happens when power goes unchecked. The Assyrians were incredible at warfare, engineering, administration, but they didn't understand the importance of diplomacy, cultural sensitivity, or fair and just rule.
And those lion hunt reliefs that Ashurbanipal made, the ones that were supposed to show his power, they take on a new meaning now that we know about the empire's fall.
Those reliefs are interesting. They show violence and dominance. They can be seen as both a celebration of Assyrian power and a hint at their downfall. The lions, they're trapped and killed, right? They represent Assyria's enemies. But they also remind us that even the strongest can be brought down, that power doesn't last forever.
That's a powerful image. It speaks to the rise and fall of empires, their glory, and their eventual decline. But before we get to the final chapter of the Assyrian Empire, let's think about the bigger picture for a minute. Even though they were known for brutality, the Assyrians had a big impact on the ancient world.
That's true. They were pioneers in military strategy, engineering, and how to run an empire. Their empire was vast. It connected distant regions and influenced later civilizations. It helped spread trade and culture.
It just goes to show that even empires remembered for their violence can have a complex legacy. They contribute both good and bad things to history. Can you give us some specific examples of how the Assyrians influenced the world?
Well, think about their military innovations. Things like having a professional army, specialized units, advanced siege techniques. These were adopted by later empires like the Persians and the Romans. The Assyrians set a standard for military organization and strategy that lasted for centuries.
It's like they wrote a guidebook for building an empire, a model for how to organize and use military force that would be copied for generations to come.
You got it. And their administrative systems. There's standardized weights and measures, a centralized government, a network of roads and communication. All those things had a lasting effect. They shaped how empires were run and organized.
These innovations weren't just about conquering, they were about managing a huge and diverse empire. They had to figure out how to keep order, collect taxes, and communicate across long distances.
And their solutions to those problems, although they were often harsh and exploitative, were really effective. Their bureaucracy, their infrastructure, and their methods of control, they all helped shape the way later empires would be structured.
It's interesting how the Assyrians, despite their brutality, were also innovative and good at solving problems. They really tackled the challenges of empire head-on, and their solutions, although often brutal, were definitely effective.
Their legacy goes beyond just military and administrative stuff, too. Their art and architecture. Things like the lion hut reliefs and the palaces of Nineveh, they had a lasting impact on artistic styles in the Near East.
Those reliefs are really something. They capture movement and power so well. The fierceness of the lions, the skill of the hunters, they show us the talent and cultural sophistication within the empire.
And the palaces in Nineveh, with their huge courtyards, intricate carvings, and gardens, they were considered wonders of the ancient world. They were symbols of Assyrian power and refinement. They showcased their wealth and cultural achievements.
It's like they wanted to leave their mark on the world, create a legacy that would outlast them. And in a way, they did. Their empire may have fallen, but their influence lasted for centuries. They shaped history in both big and small ways.
Their story reminds us that even the strongest empires eventually disappear. They rise, they fall, they have moments of greatness, and then they decline. It's a valuable lesson for anyone who studies history.
Well said.
I think it's important to appreciate just how ambitious they were and the lasting impact they had on the ancient world. For a time, they were the undisputed rulers of Mesopotamia. They shaped history and left a legacy that still fascinates us today.
It's a legacy that's part of the story of civilizations that came after them. A story of innovation, ambition, brutality, and finally, decline. As we move into the last part, we'll see how internal conflicts, external pressure, and the consequences of their actions ultimately caused the collapse of the Assyrian Empire.
But even in their fall, there are lessons to be learned. We gain insights into the nature of power, the difficulties of running an empire, and the enduring legacy of the ancient world. So let's continue our journey into the twilight of the Assyrian Empire and explore the events that brought about their demise.
We've been talking about the rise of the Assyrian Empire, from its start in the city of Ashur to its peak as a major power in the ancient Near East. But, like all empires, the things that made them strong often contained the seeds of their downfall. What would you say were the biggest reasons they collapsed?
Well, they relied so heavily on their military and brutal tactics. It worked in the short term, but it made a lot of their subjects resent them. They created this atmosphere where people were ready to rebel.
Yeah, it shows that lasting power isn't just about force, it's about diplomacy, justice, inspiring loyalty, not fear. The Assyrians were amazing warriors, but they didn't seem to get those other important parts of ruling.
Right. They were great at conquering, but not so great at keeping things stable. Their harsh methods, the mass deportations, the way they treated conquered people, it all created bitterness and a desire for revenge.
So it was like this vicious cycle. The more they used violence to stay in control, the more resistance they faced, which led to even more brutality. It seems almost pointless trying to crush the unrest.
Exactly. And this instability within the empire happened at the same time as threats from outside. New enemies, like the Medes, saw a chance to take them down.
The Medes, that Iranian group, they were getting stronger and more powerful, weren't they? They must have seen how fragile the Assyrians really were, all the resentment, and that the empire was stretched too thin.
Absolutely. And they weren't afraid to take advantage.
So they joined forces with others who were unhappy with Assyria, like the Babylonians who wanted their freedom back.
Right. It was the perfect situation for the Assyrians to fall. They were weakened from fighting within, and now they had a bunch of determined enemies. Their once great empire started to break apart, and the fall of Nineveh, their capital city, that was a turning point.
Nineveh, the city that Sennacherib had made into this symbol of Assyrian power, with those incredible lion hunt carvings, now is being attacked by the Medes and Babylonians. It's kind of symbolic, isn't it? The heart of the empire falling to the people they had oppressed for so long.
It really is. And the siege of Nineveh was a long and brutal event. There were stories of chaos and destruction, fires burning all over, palaces being looted, and the Assyrian army defeated. It was the end of an empire that had seemed unbeatable.
A reminder that even the most powerful empires don't last forever. They have their time of glory and then they decline. It's a valuable lesson from history.
It is. The Assyrian story is a warning. Power without wisdom, compassion, and justice, it can destroy itself.
What are the main things we can learn from them? What can we take away from their rise and fall?
Well, I think one important lesson is balance. The Assyrians were fantastic at military strategy and administration, but they didn't know how to be diplomatic or rule fairly. Their brutality ended up hurting them, making their people hate them, and making it easy for others to rebel.
So true strength is not just about military power. It's about building trust, making allies, and ruling with fairness and compassion.
Exactly. Another important lesson is about understanding and respecting other cultures. The Assyrians tried to force their culture and religion on the people they conquered. That only made people resent them even more.
That's something we still struggle with today. Cultural differences and the fight for identity are important in politics and how countries interact with each other.
You're absolutely right. And one last thing. The fall of the Assyrians shows how connected the environment and human actions are. Of course, their brutality played a big part in their downfall, but there was also a really bad drought during Ashurbanipal's reign that probably weakened them, made them more vulnerable to internal fighting and attacks from outside.
It's a reminder that even the biggest empires are at the mercy of things they can't control. We're all part of this delicate system, and our actions can have big consequences. They affect the environment and change the course of history.
It's important to keep that in mind, especially now with all the challenges we face in the world. The Assyrian Empire may be gone, but their story can still teach us things.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up our exploration of the Assyrian Empire, let's remember what they taught us. Let's work to build societies that are not just powerful and advanced, but also fair, kind, and aware of how fragile life is on our planet. And let's not forget the power of history. It teaches us, challenges us, and inspires us to create a better future. If you like this episode, please like and subscribe for more fascinating explorations of history and the things that shape our world.